After a horrible start for the Vancouver Canucks and multiple offers for Bo Horvat to potentially re-sign with the Vancouver Canucks, it seems as if the possibility of Bo Horvat re-signing with Vancouver is officially dead. According to Rick the Wall or whatever his name is,
Dollywall.
Dollywall, my bad. Bo Horvat has rejected Vancouver's final offer, and the team will now take the best trade for him. And also, according to Thomas Drance, he reacted to the news of Bo Horvat rejecting the final offer of the Vancouver Canucks, and he said that this doesn't feel like another phase in the negotiation. This feels like a parting, could be an offing at some point. So it also was mentioned that it was an 8-year offer that was rejected, and now it's time to talk some trade destinations. So, Luca, what are your thoughts on this whole situation, and where do you think is the first destination for Bo Horvat?
Well, I think that I'm not really surprised that he rejected this contract offer, just because I think at the end of the day, Bo Horvat's had a really good, season this year. He's had a really good start to the year. But not only that, he's the captain of the Vancouver Canucks, and he hasn't really seen the playoffs in his career. He saw the playoffs twice, sorry, in his career with the Vancouver Canucks. And I think that at 27 years old, he's hitting his prime now. He's at a point in his career where it's time for him to start focusing on winning. I think the Vancouver are just not in the right position to have this guy around in the lineup. And I think that not only that, but I think the contract that they offered him was, I believe it was under $8 million, and I believe that Bo Horvat's looking for about $8 million, which seems pretty high in my opinion. But with the way he's playing this season, it might be just what he ends up getting. In terms of that, I think, listen, Vancouver don't really have the cap space to go ahead and make that move for Bo Horvat. I think he wants to cash in this offseason. I don't think he's too happy with the situation in Vancouver. And I think that at the end of the day, kind of like Brock Besser, I think the Canucks need to kind of move on here. And I think they've got two guys in Brock Besser and in Bo Horvat that need changes of sceneries, need an opportunity elsewhere. And I think more so for Bo Horvat, because of the fact that his contract is going up, his value is at an all-time high right now. The Vancouvers can cash in, and Canucks can cash in and get some really good value for him. So I think if you're the Canucks, yes, it's disappointing because he's your captain. He's the guy that's been there with you since you drafted him. He was the first team that he ever played for was the Vancouver Canucks. But in this situation, I just think it makes sense to get the best offer available, trade him to a contender, to a team that's going to take him, even if it's as a rental. And then, in the offseason with Bo Horvat, then he makes the decision as to where he wants to go and where he wants to sign. So I think it's not a big deal. I don't think Canucks fans should panic about it. I think it does suck, though, in the sense that, your captain doesn't want to come back and play for you anymore. So there is an end of an era type of vibe that it looks like it's going to end up being between the two.
Well, look, Bo Horvat drafted first round, ninth overall in 2013. Currently 27 years old. He has 20 goals in
Yeah.
28 games, 9 assists for a total of 29 points. It looks as of right now that he is on pace to beat his all-time record in his career so far for most goals in a season of last season, which was 31 goals in 70 games. So, normally what's his range in terms of points? Well, he is I would say a 45 to 60 point player. His best season was in 2018, 2019, 82 games, 27 goals, 34 assists, 61 points total. Um, Last season, he had 52 points in 70 games. Like he's a bona fide top six centerman, and we know how hard it is to acquire one, how to develop one. So we know that the asking price will be hefty in terms of what Vancouver wants in return for a player like Bo Horvat. Now the question is though, with JT Miller essentially being re-signed during the offseason and Brock Besser being re-signed in the offseason, you know, it seems to me as if they re-signed the wrong players and that the priority should have
Yep.
been Horvat, who now is going to be walking away. They will trade him because he is a UFA at the end of the season. So let's say he does get traded. There's a possibility that maybe he does walk during
Yeah.
free agency, or maybe he does sign an extension with the team that he get traded to. But we all know that there's rumors that they want to get rid of Brock Besser, which we already covered in the trade destination video prior to this video, and also JT Miller. You know, $8 million per season after this season. Wow, that's insanity,
Yeah.
especially the way, he's been playing right now defensively. There's been a lot of criticism with his overall play, and, everyone's saying, "Well, he's able to play, the wings and as a center." And there's a lot of Vancouver fans clamoring that that is not the fact. He is just a winger. He's not a centerman, and Bo Horvat is essentially the bona fide, top 6 centerman that, people would love to have. And in terms of that, let's start off with the first team, the Minnesota Wild, who has been dying for a first line center for the longest time. It's a team that lost Kevin Fiala. Yes, they have interest in Brock Besser as well, who is from Minnesota as well. It would be crazy to see a blockbuster deal, seeing both of them getting traded to Minnesota, but the likeliness of that happening is very low. But what are your thoughts on Minnesota, Luca, being a
I think in terms of need, and I think we'll kind of address it in the same way that Brock Besser was. I think a need makes sense for them, but cap wise, it just doesn't. And I think, like, look, they're in a really big situation cap wise, and I think that if you're Minnesota, you have to make a decision as to which one you're going to go for, right? They're interested in Besser and they're interested in Horvat. I think Horvat for them personally, just because they need a center, makes more sense to go after him. They've got Joel Eriksson Ek, who I believe could be a second line center, but I could see a situation where they bring in a guy like Bo Horvat to be their number one center, and maybe they move someone to make that happen. We made some suggestions last episode about some of the guys that they could potentially trade. One of them being Alex Goligoski, the other one being Matt Dumba as potential players that could go the other way. But I think if you're Minnesota, you're gonna have to make a move here that includes Matt Dumba likely going back the other way. Just because I think cap wise it'll work. But not only that, I think they're both unrestricted free agents, so it just makes sense.
yeah.
So that's a situation that I think could work. But I think if you're Minnesota, getting both is not going to really work. It's really going to be a decision on which one do you really want to go for, and are you going to be able to afford it long term? In terms of saying that if you're in the sense of Bo Horvat, are you going to be able to resign him after this season? So I do see Minnesota as a potential team. I
But
think
it's
it
not only
makes
it's
sense.
not only that, Luca. I would like to also add something else if you don't mind. But
Yeah.
they played Ryan Hartman, who is a winger, a third line winger, in my opinion, as a centerman, a top centerman last year in the 2021-2022 season, which it did work. But now, you got Frederick Goudreau, who's currently playing the first line. And he was playing as a checking, player, as more as a bottom six player, and he's 29 years old. And then you have a promising Marco Rossi who isn't there yet in terms of his development. And, you need someone that's a clear cut first line centerman. And, that's a position that they're lacking in. They're very strong in terms of their winger depth, but in terms of the center depth, they have a lot of interchangeable guys, but they don't have a bona fide first line center. And I think Bo Horvat is exactly what they need. And that's a guy that if they do trade for, they're going to have to lock him up long term.
Yeah, I don't know if cap wise if it's gonna work, but I think we'll see. I think Minnesota is one of those teams that I think they're really interested in a lot of these guys, and I think it makes sense for a lot of these guys to go there. But it's just a question of how is Bill Guerin going to be able to make this work and make it work under the cap. I want to move on to a team that, in my opinion, I think is the best fit for Bo Horvat, and that's the New York Islanders. And I think the reason why it's such a good fit is because we always talk about Matt Barzal, right? And Barzal's having a really good season this year. But I think that if you're kind of the New York Islanders, you want to have a good 1-2 punch. And I think that as much as Brock Nelson has had a really good season, and even a guy like Jean Gabriel Pajot, it needs to be a situation now where you're looking at this going, okay, we have an opportunity to acquire a really good centerman. You've got Brock Nelson who's doing well. Anders Lee's an unmovable contract. However, Josh Bailey's a guy that makes a lot of sense if you want to move him away from there. And even to some extent, and I know people might look at me and call me crazy, but even a guy like Jean-Gabriel Pajot could be an opportunity to potentially move him away. I know he's having a good season with the Islanders, but if the Islanders are going to make this work just in terms of players, there's definitely an opportunity here to bring in a guy like Bo Horvat, sign him to a long-term contract, and have your 1-2 punch be Bo Horvat and Matt Barzal. You can move Brock Nelson down to the wing after. If you trade a guy like Josh Bailey away, that frees up some cap space as well that you can use to re-sign Bo Horvat. And at the same time, you're not necessarily you're not necessarily wasting a lot of money. The other thing is too is that the Islanders have a lot of assets here that they could make work, that they can potentially even acquire Brock Besser in a deal as well, because of the fact that they've got so many guys that they've got signed under contract. So I think the Islanders are a really interesting team. I think it makes sense to get a guy like Bo Horvat. The Islanders have always been a team that needed scoring, and I think Horvat with 20 goals this season, if he goes on the Islanders, can help bolster their goal scoring a little
I,
bit
I
too.
would I
And
would I would think that a guy like Anthony Bolivier, who has been part of trade rumors for the longest time, that hasn't really been a fit in the New York Islanders organization, could potentially be a fit as well.
yeah, he's another one that makes a lot of sense. And look, yeah, he's struggled. He's got 11 points in 27 games last year at 34 and 75. A change of scenery for Beauvillier could make a lot of sense. And I know the Canucks had interest in him, I believe, last season too when they were at the draft. I know the Habs and the Canucks were two teams that were talked about. So listen, if you're going to make a move for Bo Horvat, Beauvillier is the perfect guy to move away, and I think the Canucks are interested in taking him
So
on too.
what do
So that
you
could work.
what do you do essentially? Because Brock Nelson's playing as a second line center. Do you shaft him to the winger
Yeah,
position, and then you
yeah.
put Bo Horvat as a second line center? So you have Barzal, Nelson, and Pajot, which is honestly a kick ass, depth chart in terms of the position of
Yeah,
center.
you have
So
you'd have essentially how I see it, right? And I know that people are going to call me a little bit crazy. I don't know how this is going to work, but essentially they'll throw Beauvillier, let's say, in a deal for Horvat, and then in a separate trade, maybe they move Josh Bailey out, and they free up some cap space there. They also have an opportunity, because of the fact that they have 14 forwards. Maybe they trade away a guy like Cal Clutterbuck or Matt Martin potentially, in order to facilitate a move for something else, right? So there's definitely an opportunity for the Islanders to make some moves. They have the cap space to do it. They have some players they can trade away to make it work. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Islanders are big players in the trade deadline this season. But I think a guy like Bo Horvat makes a ton of sense for them. I even think Brock Besser makes a ton of sense for them. But
yeah,
for me,
that,
I think Bo
that's
Horvat,
those
like,
are way too many moves for Lula Morello to be doing. We were not expecting that much activity from him. We always have high hopes for him, and he always lets everyone
yeah,
down.
but
But
Lou's always the type of guy that goes expect the unexpected. Anyways, I want to move on to another team, and I think a team that I think is not underachieving this season, but should be playing a lot better than what I think they have been playing like lately, and that's the Carolina Hurricanes. And the reason I think this makes a lot of sense is because they've got a guy that's 34 years old, that's on an expiring deal this year, that I think makes that I think is someone that they can definitely look to potentially extend, yes, beyond next season. But I don't know if he's ready to be a second line center anymore. And I think Bo Horvat makes a ton of sense. That's Jordan Stahl. So Jordan Stahl makes $6 million for the next season. Well, this season, and then he's an unrestricted free agent. However, with the Hurricanes, you acquire Bo Horvat. Now your center core becomes Sebastian Aho, Bo Horvat, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who's underperformed
do you think they
dramatically.
actually throw in a guy like Jesper Kotkaniemi part of a deal because they
No,
just regret
I
it?
don't think they trade Kotkaniemi. I think they're going to try to use him as a third line center. But a guy
Okay.
that I think they may throw into a deal, and I know people might be surprised about this, might be Teuvo Teravainen. The reason I say that is because Teravainen this season in 17 games has 8 points, and he's got 0 goals and 8 assists. I think maybe a change of scenery for a guy like Teuvo
Well, I mean,
Teravainen
look, he had
could
a
make a
very
lot
good
of sense.
start with the Hurricanes, but ever since he's been
Injury.
plagued with a lot of injuries, and that really hasn't helped his game. And he's very, he's slowed down essentially because
Yeah.
of those injuries. So I totally respect that decision, but I just want to hop in here and add a little bit of context on why we think Horvat's a good fit. Like right now, you currently have Paul Stastny playing as a first line center. Yes, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, let's be honest, you're not a top six centerman.
Nope.
He's playing there because Sebastian Aho is currently dealing with an injury. Then Jordan Stahl is perfect as a fourth line center, and you have Derek Stepan as a fourth line center. But you can tell that obviously you have guys like Max Pacioretty who are out. Jesper Fast, Andrea Cass as well. But like again, you look at the center position, they did lose a guy in Vincent Trocheck last season, who was a good two-way centerman, and I think a guy like Bo Horvat makes a lot of
Yep,
sense. And especially
absolutely.
considering that Derek Stepan and Paul Stastny don't have much time left in terms of their career. They're going to be, you know, they're close to retirement essentially. Whether they play another season past this year, that is yet to be determined. But these guys are not long term plans; they're just like short term plans. So if you want a long term plan, Bo
Yeah.
Horvat's your guy. You're bringing already guys like Max Pacioretty and Brent Burns. Obviously, the Hurricanes are showing that they want to win now. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's my take
Well,
on the Hurricanes.
I want to move on to the not the Minnesota Wild, the Colorado Avalanche.
Yeah,
Now this is a team that's interesting because they've shown interest in Sean Monahan, and what's interesting with the Colorado Avalanche is I don't think that they acquire Bo Horvat to be a long term solution. I think they acquire Bo Horvat to go for a second cup run. But what's interesting about the Colorado Avalanche is that they've had a lot of injuries this season, right? And obviously, with Nathan McKinnon's contract extension kicking in this season, they have the opportunity to be able to bring in a centerman on a rental deal. And that I believe would be Bo Horvat. And what's interesting about that is that they've already got a lot of injuries, but I still think that even with all their injuries, I still think Bo Horvat makes a ton of sense for a team like this, especially since they lost Nazem Kadri last year,
yeah.
and it's going to be really interesting to see how they're going to be able to fix that moving forward because Kadri was a big part of their success last season in the playoffs. I think Bo Horvat could be a really good replacement for them. So it's going to be interesting to see whether it's going to be Bo Horvat or Sean Monahan that the Colorado Avalanche end up pursuing. But I would not be surprised if they go after one or the other, just because I think those are two guys that contracts are up this season. But not only that, they're both playing really good hockey, and I think they're both really good fits for the Colorado Avalanche, at least for another cup run. So I see that if they do trade Horvat to Colorado, it's for a pure rental and nothing more, in my opinion.
Yeah, because obviously they're gonna have to make a lot cap space for a guy like Bo Horvat. He's gonna cash in, right? So I do completely understand that perspective. But like you were saying, like right now you have Mikko Rantanen playing as a center. Normally he's playing the wing, right?
Yeah,
So once you have a healthy McKinnon and Evan Rodriguez, that means you have Rodriguez playing a third line role, and first line you have McKinnon. But the
yeah.
second line role, you would give that to Bo Horvat. JT Kempfer would either play fourth line center or he's moved to the wing. He's probably going to have to fight a fourth line center position with Alex Newhook, who's currently the center there. So obviously there's room to improve, and they definitely do have assets. It just long term, I don't see that being a fit. Short term for another cup run definitely makes sense. So let's move on to the next team who,
I think
you
it's the
know,
final team too.
yeah, I would say this is the final team.
Yeah,
The Columbus, no, actually, there's two more. The Columbus Blue Jackets, the second last team. So they add Johnny Gaudreau, and they already have Patrick Laine. But what are they missing in between them? A center. And
yeah.
Bo Horvat could be that guy. And once you have that missing piece, they could compete to be one of the best top 10 lines in the league. You're not going to put Boom Jenner. You're not going to put Jack Roslovich. It's just not going to work out there. So you need a guy who's a bona fide first line center. Somewhat of the same situation with the Minnesota Wild. They need a legit first line center. And if you put Bo Horvat in between Johnny Gaudreau and Patrick Laine, oh boy, we're gonna see
Well,
sparks flying.
and what I like about the Columbus Blue Jackets is this is a really interesting situation. So obviously they've got Werenski who's out for the year. They've got Voracek that looks like he'll be out for the year. That's about $16 million in LTIR space that they can basically use. They can make this trade for Horvat tomorrow morning if they wanted to. However, I don't think they decide to do that. And the reason I say that is because I don't think this is a move that you make during the season. The Jackets are not in a position to win this season. They're not in a position to necessarily compete. And I don't think that if you're Bo Horvat, you're necessarily going to want to go to Columbus, even if he doesn't really have a say in the matter. I don't think he's going to want to go to Columbus now. Now, during the offseason, it's a little bit of a different conversation because then it's a question of who offers me the most money and what makes the most amount of sense. I think Columbus makes sense. I think Horvat in Columbus would work just because he'd play alongside Laine and Gaudreau as a first line center, and I think that would be fantastic. However, in season, in terms of making a trade, I don't think Columbus is in a rush to make a move like that, and I don't think they're necessarily it's necessarily a necessity to make a move like that. Just because, like I said, they're out of a playoff spot, and to trade prospects and draft picks for a player of that caliber when you're out of the playoffs and with the draft class that's as good as what it is this season, just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me to do that. So I think that if they do pursue Horvat, I think it's a free agency move, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are players in that. However, in terms of making a trade, I just don't see Bo Horvat ending up being a
I
jacket at the
I
deadline.
couldn't have said that better myself. This is gonna be an off-season move, not
Yeah,
an in-season move. And the last team, the Washington Capitals. So, look, they have Evgeny Kuznetsov, who normally plays on the first line. It's not working out this year with Ovechkin, so he's been playing on the second line. You have Dylan Strome as a first line center. Who would have thought, you know? And Lars Eller not having the best season. He's a UFA at the end of the season. I do see him being traded. I don't think the Washington Capitals are going to make a playoff spot this year. Um, then you have Nick Dowd, who's playing as a fourth line center. Backstrom, it looks like his career's done. I don't think see him coming back. Carl Hagelin, I don't see him coming back. So obviously they're gonna have to improve, their center depth. Connor Brown's a winger, so forget that. Tom Wilson's a winger, forget that. But they're injured as well. They're not back yet. I think Connor Brown's season's basically done. So they have the
yeah,
cap space, to make it work this season and even, long term as well. And if you're going to replace a guy like Nicholas Backstrom, Bo Horvat's a good candidate. And having Bo Horvat playing on the first line or second line, and then you have Kuznetsov in the top six as well, that's fantastic. That means you have Dylan Strome taking Elder's spot once Elder is gone, either by the deadline or during the offseason. So he plays the third line role. And you have Nick Dowd as a fourth line center. So it keeps the team competitive because as long as Alexander Ovechkin is on this team, the Washington Capitals are going to want to compete until the very end.
yeah, exactly. And I think, like, look, I think Bo Horvat would be a really good fit there, and obviously with Tom Wilson coming back as well as a right winger, I think it would definitely make their top six a lot better. Lars Eller, I think, is a guy that would make a lot of sense going back the other way. But not only that, I think the Caps, if they're trying to win, I think Bo Horvat makes a ton of sense. And I think even at that, like you said, with Backstrom not coming back, I think even long term, Bo Horvat makes a lot of sense in Washington. And there was a rumor that Anthony Mantha could be potentially in the mix for Brock Besser. So if the Caps can try to pull off, I'm not saying it happens, but if they can pull off a double swoop for Bo Horvat and Brock Besser, that could be really good for them moving forward. So I would be interested in keeping an eye on the Capitals. I think the Capitals know that what's at stake here. They want to win one more cup for Ovi. I
Yeah.
think that they're competitive enough still in the Metro that they can make a move like this. And I think that if you're the Capitals, you're desperate as well because you're out of a playoff spot right now. You've got a guy that's available that's really really good, and I think that he helps their team. And he's another guy that I think would also help Ovechkin get to his record of beating Gretzky's record. So it's one of those things that the Caps need to look at, and I think that Horvat would be a really good fit in Washington too. So
Yeah,
that's how I see it.
they have the pieces in terms of, players that are already established in the NHL that they can move, but they
Yeah,
also have some, good quality prospects. They definitely don't have the best prospect pool, but they have good
no,
enough prospects that could be thrown in a package deal along with
definitely.
picks. So, there's other teams like Boston that's been mentioned, the Detroit Red Wings as well, Edmonton Oilers. We don't think that's gonna happen. That's just our own personal opinion. But guys, make sure to write in the comment section below who may be the best destination for Bo Horvat. Who's the most likeliest to trade for him? What is his trade value essentially? We'd like to hear your,
Yeah.
your mock deals as well. And does he get traded at the deadline? Or do you think maybe Vancouver miraculously has a miracle offer that, Horvat essentially says, you know what, I'm gonna resign with them and see what happens long term.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens there, guys. We like to see, obviously we're hoping for a trade so we can do a breakdown. But we'll see what you guys say. The Vancouver Canucks fan base, any of the fan bases that we mentioned, we'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well. If you haven't liked this episode already, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our podcast, and share this video with anyone who loves the Vancouver Canucks, Bo Horvat, or any teams in the mix for Bo Horvat. We'll see you on the next
All right.
episode of the Young Guns podcast.